Hello, my name is Rick Doughton. I'm the VP of Information Security at Centene Corporation and act as the CISO for Carolina Complete Health here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Today I'm going to talk about cloud organizational structures and what we need and what has changed that has caused us to kind of create this cloud organization within the enterprise. But first I'm going to start with a little history lesson, because this isn't the first time that new innovation has caused an organization to be able to have to change, what roles people had. And so, cloud touches every single aspect of our IT organization, from security to development to infrastructure to servers to networking, everything. So who's responsible for it? Who's in charge? Who funds it, right? But I want to kind of go through 6 different times in the last 25 years that this kind of thing happened before, and then end with some tips of what to consider when developing the organization, because there's no one size fits all, obviously. So first, I'm going back to the early 90s when Novell was the networking platform. Remember when everybody was getting their Novell CNE certification to be Novell network people? Well, come mid to late 90s, that kind of dissipated, right? Where networking just became a commodity. It was all TCP/IP, and it became servers and Windows servers, and Novell just kind of went away, right? So then the next thing that happened was in the early 2000s with the rise of Wi-Fi. And not unlike cloud, this kind of became something that was a grassroots effort where people started putting up hotspots so they could go out and roam the cabin freely without being plugged into the network jack in the wall. And so we had to figure out, well, is it the network team that manages these access points? Is it the endpoint team that kind of manages the connection? Do we now have to engage the identity team to be able to have a new access control, because it no longer becomes based on connection, but you want to be able to identify it? Some of the early zero trust models, right? Next is bank ATMs. Back in the late 80s, IBM came up with this great stable operating system called OS/2, which some of you may remember. And that was what all the bank ATMs were for like a decade and a half. But in 1996, as IBM was going to end of life OS/2, leading up to that, all the bank ATMs had to decide, what am I going to do with the next operating system? And one would have thought maybe FreeBSD or some kind of embedded Linux, but no, they landed on embedded Windows XP. Not the most stable, not the most consistent, very finicky, takes a lot of care and feeding. And so the team that used to manage the bank ATM network, no longer had this great stable brick at the end of this line that was often over, connected to a mainframe, but now had to have this finicky, takes a lot of care Windows box. So many financial institutions took the responsibility of that into the desktop group. So the people who manage Windows XP systems on thousands or tens of thousands of devices on the network have got to roll in these ATMs, which was a totally different mindset for them. You have to add antivirus to it. You have to update it. You have to patch it. You made them, how many times you come up to an ATM and it's blue screen. And so that was a very big challenge. And there was a lot of lessons learned in trying to transition from this particular group who managed it before to this new desktop group who were used to dealing with people and now have this disparate, set of devices across across an area. The next time we're going to talk about is in the late 2000s when we got into voice over IP. Again, like OS/2 being the stable brick at the end of a line, a Windows phone switch, which has probably been installed 20 years before, you didn't have to do anything with. Standard analog switch, it gets plugged into the bottom of the building, didn't have to really worry about it. And moving to voice over IP, we now have network equipment. We have gateways, we have controllers, we have identity systems. We have all these things that are kind of this network equipment that now the group who used to manage the phone switches and the voice no longer has that expertise. And so the network team picks it up. And now we have to manage voice. And that's not something that data network people had to worry about before. So we had challenge in that. Then when we get to the early 2000s, BlackBerries. The BlackBerry was a great thing in the late 2000s. Everyone had them. I worked in DC for decades, and everybody in Washington DC had a BlackBerry. But then after 2010, with the rise of iPhones and better Android phones, people started wanting to use that, and BlackBerry started to decline. And so where you had this great BlackBerry team who understood it, now we have, different mobile platforms, and they're connecting in different ways, and we have mobile device management, which BlackBerry just kind of took care of before, and security, which BlackBerry just kind of took care of before. And so who's responsible for that? Is it the network team? Is it the desktop team? Does the security team need to get involved? The identity team has to get involved, because mobile is not based on connection. I'm not plugging into the wall or even connecting to Wi-Fi. I have to come as an identity. And so again, it's a connection based on identity, not based on absolute physical connection. And so that became challenges. And so how we had to change organization and IT to manage this, which brings us to cloud. Cloud is another grassroots thing that, remember, we talked about shadow IT and people using Dropbox, or, people going and getting some, SaaS thing for, for project management and other types of things. And now we want to kind of get control of it. We want to get visibility in it. And it touches so many different parts of the organization. And so, we struggle now with even those who've been kind of cloud for the last few years. Who's responsible for it? Is it the server team, the network team, the application team, the security team, the identity team, the database team? Is there a whole shared services team, even in contracts, because a lot of these are software as a service. And so it becomes this real team sport. And being able to define who is responsible, whose budget pays for it, who manages it, and who's accountable for it becomes a challenge. So I'm going to leave you with 4 kind of key things to think about. 1, define ownership. Even if it may not be right now, have that single person who's responsible for cloud. And they're going to matrix in from all these other organizations, all different types of people who need to help support the effort. Because a lot of times in cloud, it's working with developers, which is the second thing. You're going to have to really embrace the developers. They may, if you do your own development and organization, you're doing it in the cloud, they will have their own CI/CD pipeline, which may be different than the cloud CI/CD pipeline, and you're going to want to kind of integrate together. They're going to be probably one of your biggest customers internally to work with. And so sometimes, cloud is kind of like, well, it's developers are doing most of it anyway. Even if they're modifying certain things that are cloud services, we might as well kind of get them included. So don't just consider developers as throw over the fence, here are your requirements, give it in, because they're going to be working so closely. And that's one of the other things is, the relationship that IT had with development was, hey, I'll set this infrastructure up, have a go, let me know if you need anything. In a CI/CD pipeline, it's going to be continuous every single day working with them. The third thing is make sure you hire or train experts. There is different nuances to cloud. And, coming from a security background, what we always look for is aptitude and people who have, troubleshooting skills or good pattern matching or kind of like persistence not to let go of a problem until they figure it out. These are the things that are important to us moreover than degrees and certifications. But in cloud, kind of what we're finding, and I owe this to our cloud, our cloud director here, is people who are script writers, whether it's Perl, Python, PowerShell, people with a mindset of like, oh, well, I'll write a script for that. That's the kind of mindset that really works, because again, you're bringing together all these different organizations, all these different things. There's governance as code, infrastructure as code. We're working with the developers. How do we get these things connected? We have containers that are coming and going. And so people who think in scripts and not in like point and click GUI are much better adapted to be able to manage this. And then finally, don't forget incident response and forensics. That's going to change too. And when we have an incident in the cloud, being able to do the traditional, identify, contain, remediate, recover kind of timeline, it's different if it's in a container. It's different if it's something that happened a week ago and something that's no longer there. And so make sure that you train up the incident response team, or make sure you hire a good incident response team on retainer who understands cloud and be able to do it. So that's my 10-minute rant. Hopefully it was helpful to you. A little bit of history lesson there. Have a great day.